Well, our first guest this evening is Carlos Whittaker. He is a speaker, worship leader, and self-professed hope dealer who appears at some of the largest churches in the country. A People's Choice Award winner, he hosts the podcast Fill in the Blank with Carlos Whittaker. But in the last 7 days, his Instagram has grown by more than 16,000 followers as he urges Christians to enter a wild faith by getting uncomfortable and standing against injustice as Jesus did in order to bring healing to the world. He joins us tonight to discuss his newest book, Enter Wild, Exchange a Mild and Mundane Faith for Life with an Uncontainable God, as well as his recent Racism Q&A series on Instagram. Welcome to the Bust the Halo Show, Carlos Whittaker. He just disappeared. He was on Zoom, and now
he made the same
face
that you made a second ago, like, trying to figure something out.
I was looking at him all during the...
Right. I don't think he got nervous and bailed. I think it was more of a tech issue because obviously he's fine with the media. It wasn't like, oh, he's about to go to me.
Maybe he has so many more Instagram followers, his computer's bogged down.
I don't know. He's crashing his system. Everyone wants to have him on. Good thing we're so close to having him on before.
I hope that by the time we get him on, he doesn't have to go do a different interview.
Right. Well, like Oprah, because he's getting so big.
He is back. Carlos Whittaker, welcome to the Busted Halo Show.
Thank the Lord.
Yeah, all right. Nice.
Thank the Lord.
Oh, my gosh.
God didn't promise us technology victories, only spiritual ones.
Zoom is not in the Bible. He did not give us any.
It is not. Forget these things.
Oh, we just threw his headphones away.
Gonna break more stuff over there.
Well, how are you other than the most recent part of your life?
I'm good. I'm so good. Thanks for letting me hang out here with you guys. So excited to be here. So
tell us what you think it is. What do you attribute? I'll start that way. To what do you attribute a mammoth increase in your following on social media over the last week or so?
Yeah, well, initially the mammoth social media following came from Carlos, the black guy that white suburban middle class evangelical women love to follow.
Okay.
Suddenly, like I love to post about birds and bunnies and my family and my trips. But then I started speaking about being a black man in America, and I had about 4,000 people immediately leave, while about 20,000 people decided to show back up for the conversation.
Wow.
So it was crazy. And then I had a video go viral yesterday, 1.5 million views, and it's all over all the news and stuff today. And so that's been a lot of fun because I've had that go viral and a whole bunch more people showed up too.
Well, maybe give us a little sense. If some of our listeners are like, well, I'm not a white evangelical woman who loves birds. Give us...
Father Dave, you look like you're a white evangelical woman that loves birds. I figure that's what
my look. That's what I'm going for.
I'm sure we could have a Zoom background that would back that up.
Yeah, I can do a fake background with birds and stuff. Yeah. What was it yesterday that went so viral?
Yeah, so I live in a upper middle class neighborhood in Nashville, Tennessee. There's not a lot of people that look like me. Actually, there's only 2 black families out of hundreds and hundreds of houses that live in my neighborhood. And there was a neighbor across the street who, he was an older gentleman in his 70s who I've tried for 4 years of living here to say hello to him, to have a conversation with him, to do any of the things, to be a nice neighbor. And he always ignores me. He even kind of scowls at me. He never says hi. And I began to build a narrative in my head about this man living in the South. You start doing these things. He had a big American flag draped from his front door. And I said, he doesn't like people that look like me. And then so I made my mind up 2 years ago. And then 2 days ago, I see my neighbor walk out. He's got 2 little porcelain white bunnies in his front yard. They're there all the time. He mows around them every single week. And I see him take a can of paint and a paintbrush, and he kneels down in front of the bigger black bunny, and he starts painting it black. And my mouth dropped, and I'm like, is he doing what I think he's doing? Is he telling me what I think he's telling me? And it took me another 12 hours to get up the courage to walk across the street to the man that I thought hated me and ask him, why did you paint the bunny black? And he paused with his lip trembling a little bit. And he said, and I recorded the conversation because I wanted my wife to hear it. And then he said, Carlos, the woman that raised me, our servant when I was growing up in the 50s in Nashville was black. She taught me to read and write, wash my hair, help me brush my teeth. And I don't know why anybody would look down upon her. So this is my small way of saying Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, oh my God. Like and immediately I apologized to him. I did. Like I said, I'm so
did you say how you had kind of presumed what he was about?
Yes, I said that I had presumed that he, I said, I hate to even say this, but the flag has been weaponized against people that look like me the last few years. And so that actually added to my bias. But listen, over the last 24 hours, my poor retired neighbor that just wants to live his life and be all alone has been on Access Hollywood, been on like all these news stations. I keep bringing him to my house, and he's just like, "What have you done to me?" But it was really cool. It was a touching moment, and the video's gone viral. It's been blessed.
Well, the book that we'd like to talk about is called Enter Wild, Exchange a Mild and Mundane Faith for Life with an Uncontainable God, where you challenge people. And obviously, you had begun writing a book. Nobody writes a book in 2 weeks. But you had begun writing a book before all this. But it would also be naive of us to think that suddenly in the last 2 weeks, racism started happening.
Yeah.
So obviously, it's there. But I mean, it's not the entire focus of the book. But one of the ways in which we find ourselves, me as a preacher, you as a preacher and teacher, find ourselves, one of the difficult things to do is to have that prophetic voice that we see the prophets in the Old Testament that are asked by God to do things that I don't want to do that because people aren't going to like me. When I have my regular congregation every week, I like that they pat me on the back of the steps of church and go, "Nice homily, Father. See you next week."
Yeah.
I don't like it when they're like, "What are you talking about?" Or unfriend 4,000 people. I don't know if my ego could take 4,000 people unfriending me, Carlos.
Yeah.
So I mean, what we're challenged to very frequently, what Jesus did is to kind of upend the system and not be comfortable in our faith. And it seems like not every Christian in the world, because a lot of Christians are suffering in the world, but where we are, that a comfortable Christianity is just fine and preferred. And I don't want to be upset the apple cart.
Yeah, it's so true. Our faith is so mild, and if there's ever been a season, at least in my lifetime, that it's time to leave mild and enter wild, when it's time to stop being a safe, secure Christian in your little bubble. And most Christians are like, "Oh, like I can't wait for heaven. Like I'm gonna deal with life right now and just kind of uncertainty, but heaven's gonna be great, and that's what I'm really waiting for." But our goal is not to like become believers and like wait for heaven. You can become a believer and you can bring heaven, and by bringing heaven, that means you're being the hands and feet. That means you're actually doing the work. That means you're standing up for injustice. That means you're going to actually have to risk in order to rescue. I honestly believe if there's no risk in your life, there's not going to be a lot of rescue in your life. And you can't risk while you're being mild. And so again, within the book, I'm trying to help Christians that have lived a safe life, especially, I didn't know this book was going to come out in the middle of the pandemic and also racial injustice issues in our country. I had no idea when I was writing it 2 years ago that this was when it was going to come out. But for such a time as this, I believe that it's a message that people need to grab a hold of.
Popular speaker and worship leader Carlos Whittaker is our guest here on the Busted Halo Show. He hosts the podcast Fill in the Blank with Carlos Whittaker. What sort of blanks do people usually fill in on your podcast? You talk about whatever?
Whatever. That's why I named it Fill in the Blank, because it's
kind of like your background is very just you can put whatever.
I put whatever I want back here. I don't know how to do that on Zoom yet. You guys you're way more official than me, but yeah, we talk about everything. I'm gonna
get a little old school for you. Like here, let's do that.
Oh yes, oh Father.
Oh, he's adding the stained glass windows. Wow.
That is awesome.
So fill in the blank. What do you guys?
Yeah, fill in the blank. It's a way for me to talk to a bunch of my friends. So like this season, I've talked to a friend of mine that's on the cast of Dear Evan Hansen in New York City. I've talked to a country music singer of mine, Russell Henderson, Dickerson. I've got a couple athletes. I just have such a wide variety of interests that I wanted to capture all kind of podcasts. And so, yeah, it's really just Carlos's podcast to talk about anything. So the blanks recently have been talking about race and race relations. And so, yeah, that's what the podcast is about.
One of the questions that we've been asking here on this show, and Carlos, all you have to do is look at the Zoom squares and see that, regularly it's the three of us. Obviously, we have guests all the time.
Yeah.
Regularly, the three of us. And I think maybe one of the things that's slowing momentum is that hard for us white privileged folks, particularly here in America, to enter into the conversation and not feel like, ooh, should we be talking? Should we be talking? And let's have some guests on or whatnot. Although we've had some of our really, I would say, most poignant conversations, either just among the three of us. We had a woman on last night who's a white woman in Louisiana who was so welcomed by a Black Catholic church community. She told that story of family and it was beautiful.
Wow.
But I mean, part of it is that, and I don't want to just say, well, let's, book some people on the show who know what they're talking about. What advice would you give us and people like me, maybe people in church, maybe bishops or pastors who don't know what to say?
Yeah, but my advice is is you don't know what to say. Don't do too much research trying to figure out what to say, and just say what is on your heart. Because I promise you, if you say what's on your heart, if you're reading the Gospels, if you're saying what it is that the Spirit is pressing upon you, it's going to be right. May it be, maybe you accidentally offend some people by saying something. Let me tell you this. Black people, black men in America, black women in America are less concerned about being offended because of the way you've said something incorrectly than we are concerned that you just won't say anything at all.
That's a great point. Wow.
So, say something. And again, there's a book called White Fragility that I'm trying to get a lot of my friends to read, because right now is not the time to be fragile as a white person in America. Like, you please don't let your feelings get hurt over the course of the few months we're talking about this, or weeks we're talking about this right now. I haven't been able to have a fragile, emotional spectrum in a long time. So can you at least, move your fragility for a couple weeks for me? Because I haven't ever been able to be that way. So,
So when you say fragility, just expand on that a little bit. Like,
I'm just talking about, I'm uncomfortable. And then I've corrected some people on my social media that have, said some things, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying my hardest, I've tried and I can't do anything right. I feel like white people are being persecuted. And I'm like, whoa, take it down.
Whoa.
That's what I'm talking about. That's some fragility, man. Why don't you just take the correction, change it, and then keep walking? That's just what I feel like I'd love to see more people.
Yeah, Carlos, you must be new to America. We don't like correction. We really don't like that.
No, nobody likes that.
Don't tell me what to do.
W. Kamau Bell, he hosts United Shades of America.
Oh yeah.
He was on with Conan O'Brien, and he was like, get it wrong. White people,
please.
Try to do it right, and we'll let you know if you didn't.
Yes.
Try.
Please. That is so good.
That's kind of what it sounded like you were saying.
Carlos Whittaker, what you've been doing a racism Q&A on Instagram. Instagram is usually pictures. How do you do the Q&A? What are some things you do?
Yeah. So a Q&A, it's in my stories, and in Instagram stories, it allows you to take in questions from people. So I have a little box, and people put in questions. And let's be honest, most of the churches and conferences and things that book me, they've been white middle class kind of people, and churches that bring me in, and conferences that bring me in. And so my following is, they see me as safe, and I feel like I am, and I'm a safe place for them to maybe ask questions that they would be scared to ask somebody else. And so I've been doing these Q&As, and people are asking me questions that, honestly, a lot of my black friends would be like, man, you're an idiot. Why would you be? And I'm like, that's just not the way that I talk to my followers. And so I give them a safe space. And so I'm answering all the questions. Like, can I say Black Lives Matter? Is that going to have me, agree with the movement if I do that? What do I talk about my racist parents, my grandparents? Should I just give them a pass? All of these, what do I do? I'm in rural America. There's no black people that live in my community. How do I do? So I try to do these Q&As on, every few days, and answer questions in a graceful way, but also a way that I think is going to propel people into conversation.
Well, do you mind if we do some? Can we do some rapid fire?
Yeah, let's do some rapid fire.
How about just a basic response? And I've heard people in the church, people in authority, and people, not just, pundits on cable news, but when they hear Black Lives Matter, the knee-jerk response is, yes, but all lives matter.
Yeah. And I would say yes, in a very nice way. An idiot knows that all lives matter. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that all lives matter. But can I tell you that if my house is on fire and the fire truck comes down my street and starts spraying every single other house because all the houses matter, I'm going to say, my house is on fire. Please put my house out.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say to people. Is we all know that all lives matter. But the reason why we have to say that Black Lives Matter is because right now, Black lives are on fire. So we've got to focus on putting that fire out.
It's almost, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but you said, hey, get it wrong. So I'm going to try to get it wrong. It's almost like we wish we didn't have to say this.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But we do.
we do. And I don't want to have to talk about this all the time. This is not what I want to talk about all the time. But I've been left no option to talk about anything else right now. So people are like, Carlos, why can't you talk about the robin's nest in your backyard like you were 3 weeks ago? And the reason why is because I'm not afforded the opportunity to, because right now this is more important. And so, it's just, we've got to get to a space where we understand that just because you say one thing, just because I say Black Lives Matter, doesn't mean that I believe that police lives don't matter. Just because I say Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that I don't believe that there are great 99% of police officers are incredible. So you can say one thing, you can talk about one thing without having to talk about everything else.
Carlos Whittaker is our guest here on the Busted Halo Show. His latest book is called Enter Wild, Exchange of Mild and Mundane Faith for Life with an Uncontainable God. Can you speak a little bit about, you do things pretty well and concisely, I've noticed, so much more concisely than I do. Can you speak a little bit about, because your book, I would say, to give it a broad brushstroke, would be primarily a spiritual book. It's a book about faith. And I think one of the things that we get wrong, if you'll permit me, as Christians and Catholics, is we put containers around, here's the spiritual life, here's like social justice, and here's worship, and all these little things. And when we do that, we can give different amounts of time and energy and priority to some, and somebody can say, well, I don't do soup kitchens, I do the rosary. So how does what we're talking about now, and I think probably just like Carlos, you experience people, changing their following or unfollowing you. I bet a lot of people that listen to our show regularly going, how come they're talking about this every day? Can we get back to our faith? What's the connection?
Yeah, I don't see a separation between what I'm doing on a daily basis all day long and how I'm living in my faith. I don't see a separation between social justice and speaking about race relations and helping people figure this out and being the hands and feet of Jesus and being the gospel. I don't see, and I think it's because I've gotten to a space where there's conversational intimacy with God all day long on a daily basis. And so since I'm in this space, and it's a wild space, it's a space where now I'm starting to see the spiritual life that I've so craved for so long begin to explode and starting to see some things that I hadn't seen before. And I think it's because I'm being his hands and feet. And so, in the book, it's very simple. And I've actually given my Enter Wild talk in corporate settings with corporate clients and they don't even know I'm talking about the Bible, because biblical truths are relative no matter what, and leadership principles. So, I'm talking about entering rest so that you lower the volume of life. And then when you lower the volume of life, the volume of what's important begins to rise. Now, what's important to me is God, but this is still practical in secular settings as well. Once you enter rest, he tells you what you need to fix. Then you move into enter war, which is the middle section of the Bible. That's where a lot of us are in right now. That's this racial injustice. That's the things that we're fighting. We're fighting things that are spiritual things, that aren't just, fleshly things, but they're spiritual things. And so you enter war, and then once you kind of fight those battles, you enter wild, and you get to step into kind of these miracle signs and wonders that are all around us. And what I believe is going to happen, there's going to be a miraculous just healing of our nation. There's going to be a miraculous healing of hearts. And I'm beginning to see even stone cold, callous hearts of people that have had racial bias for a long time begin to crumble, because I honestly believe we're taking the spiritual, we're taking the natural and the supernatural, and we're putting them together.
Well, praise be to God. If not, let's not say if, when that happens.
Yeah,
it feels
absolutely.
like it's happening. Carlos, I got to ask you one more thing before you go, because I know Brett would want me to ask it. Do you like Dr. Pepper at all?
Do I like Dr. Pepper? No, I'll be honest. I went through a season of life, and it was junior high. So when I was in junior high, I really loved Dr. Pepper. It's all I would drink. But then something happened when I turned like 22, and it started tasting like cough syrup. So it never did before. It never did before, but then it started tasting like that.
Yeah, well, I think Father Dave was pointing out that you have a nice high energy level that we love.
Because Carlos, I can't drink coffee, because if I have caffeine, I turn into like Carlos.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if that's one of your many sources. I'm sure the Spirit of God is your primary source.
Yes, and I will tell you this too. I have not had a drop of coffee in 3 years.
Oh my God.
Or caffeine in general.
Well, so, all right.
Jeez.
Because I would be like, just imagine.
Right, that's what people say.
Wouldn't have fit in this little Zoom box we got you. Right?
Now, of course, I took a gamble by asking that question, Carlos, and you've definitely fed into how Brett always mocks me. That's
Great
a child's drink.
It's a child's drink. You quit in 8th grade, which I would say is the normal ending point of a Dr. Pepper career.
Dr. Pepper career.
We got Father Pepper here on my left, at least on my screen. He likes to have just a little touch here and there, give him a boost, which apparently you don't need. Well done.
I love it.
Carlos Whittaker, I would love it if you're not so. Oh, taking a picture.
Yeah, I got it. Boom.
Oh, you already did?
Oh, no. Everyone smile. 1, 2. All right, cool.
So we would love to have you back sometime if you can.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. I'm
love
sorry
it.
your computer crashed earlier.
No, it's okay. Thanks for being patient with me.
No
Got
problem.
it.
All right.
All right.
When we return here on the Busta Hill Show, more of your questions of faith. So keep it on the Catholic channel, Sirius XM 129.